for the sermon this morning. So please take your Bible out, or your phone, or tablet, whatever you happen to be reading from, and turn to the book of 1 Timothy in the New Covenant Scriptures. And I will be reading this morning 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. If you did not bring a scripture with you and you don't have one on your phone, there are scriptures available in the seats, under the seats in front of you. Please help yourself and follow along. It's important that we see the word for ourselves. So reading now from 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. It is a trustworthy statement. If any man aspires to the office of overseer, it is a fine work he desires to do. An overseer, then, must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, temperate, prudent, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not addicted to wine or pugnacious, but gentle, peaceable, free from the love of money, one who manages his own household well, keeping his children under control with all dignity. But if a man does not know how to manage his own household, how will he take care of the church of God? And not a newcomer, so that he will not become conceited and fall into the condemnation incurred by the devil. And he must have a good reputation with those outside, so that he will not fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. Let's pray. Father, we thank you so much for your word, and we thank you that you have something in it for us this morning about leadership and about what it takes to thrive as a congregation, what it takes to be a congregation of mentions, of people who love you and love others. And so, Father, we ask that you would open our eyes to your word this morning. I ask that the Holy Spirit would be at work to bring light and understanding to the heart of each one who hears. And as always, I ask as well, Father, that your Spirit would be at work in me, that I might be a useful tool in your hand, that Yeshua would be glorified, that your work here in this community would be furthered. And so we thank you that this is your will, so we thank you. We pray these things confidently in Yeshua's name. Amen. Amen. And so we're going to be talking about leadership, congregational leadership, church leadership, whatever you want to call it. And for us, this is a hot burner issue, isn't it, in our community, especially here in Chicago over the last year. It's been front and center in the believing community. We have seen firsthand the devastating consequences of church leaders who were highly gifted but ultimately unqualified to serve in the capacity in which they were serving. We saw the devastation that it could reach in a community amongst the believers. We saw how it can bring disregard and disrepute to the name of God and Messiah in the unbelieving community. But it's not just the high-profile men who we read about in the newspaper that failed in both of the big cases that I'm thinking of. It wasn't just the top guys who failed. The men who were charged as elders, and in one church's instance, men and women who were charged as elders, which might alert you to a problem right away. But the men and women who were charged in those communities to serve as elders failed to discharge their responsibility to love the community they serve and to love the leaders with whom they serve enough to correct them and hold them lovingly accountable to the things that were observed and the things that were going on. Leadership matters because it directly impacts the health of God's flock and God's reputation in the eyes of the world. I mean, that's one of the reasons I read the scriptures I read in leading up to the Shema and the V'ahavta was I wanted us to remember that it's God's flock. We are God's flock. And we are his sheep. And he cares deeply about us. So when we injure the sheep, we are injuring that which belongs to God. And when we fail to care for God's sheep the way he desires, when we fail to love them the way he desires, his name is brought into disregard. people think less of him, the one who loves us perfectly. And so it's an important issue. Leadership matters because it directly impacts the health of God's flock and God's reputation amongst unbelievers. And so in our study of 1 Timothy, we have been looking at this theme, pay close attention, pay close attention. And it is because we want to be a loving community. Paul said to Timothy, pay close attention to yourself and to your teaching. Persevere in these things. For as you do this, you will ensure salvation, deliverance for yourself and for those who hear you. And so it isn't necessarily, it is in part salvation in the ultimate sense, that if you're paying attention to yourself and what you're teaching, people will hear the true message of salvation and come to faith through it. But he's talking about delivering an entire community from the consequences of sin by what you teach and how you teach. And of course, Paul goes on to say, but the goal of our instruction or our commands is love from a pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith. And we talked about how the goal of paying attention, the goal of really being careful about what we teach is that we want to create not people who are just knowledgeable in the Word, but we want a community of people who know the Word, but are actually doing what? They're applying it. Right? That's the whole point of the Great Commission. Teaching them how to keep everything that I command. People who are learning to express love in practical and in real ways. And so, what kind of leaders does Paul want Timothy to appoint? Comes the question that we really need to focus on. And there are many respected models of leadership in the world that are not for the worse, are incorporated into the believing community. And so some of you who have been through our Growing Deeper seminar will recognize this slide. And for those of you who can't read it, like I can't read that screen in the back, I will read that to you. This is one of the questions from one of our Growing Deeper 2 seminar. It says, the qualifications for an elder are parallel to A, a corporate CEO, B, a self-starting entrepreneur, C, a spiritually mature Christian, D, a starship captain. Amen. One of my favorite questions. One of my favorite questions. And so what's the answer to that question? D, a starship captain. Yes. Make it so. No, it's a spiritually mature Christian, right? It's a spiritually mature Christian. And so that's going to be the focus of what Paul is talking about and what he is admonishing Timothy to understand about appointing men into leadership positions within the believing community. And so he's going to do that by giving Timothy a list of qualifications for what a leader should be in his person. And so today's text is actually, just so you can get a little insight into why I chose 1 Timothy, one of the reasons I chose 1 Timothy to teach 1 Timothy is because of this text. I wanted for us as a community to take time to reflect on and rethink these qualifications because they are so critical to the life and function of our community. Because the elders of the olive tree have been prayerfully searching and talking with various men in our congregation about becoming candidates for elders because we need to add to the number of elders in order to serve the community most effectively. And I know none of you, that's really very trifling. Hopefully most of you don't want to deal with the fact that I am as old as I am and that for the health and long-term growth of our community, we need to be thinking and praying about God providing a new, younger leader. Okay? I'm not going anywhere. I'm not looking to quit. I'm not burned out. That's not what's going on. But that is in the not that distant future. And so this is critical stuff for us. This is stuff that we as a community really need to think through, pray through, and then together in the Lord work seeking Him for these types of men to lead and care for His sheep, His sheep. And so what can we take away from Paul's instruction to Timothy? And so this morning's message is entitled, Accept No Substitutes. And the subtitle is, It Takes a Mensch to Make a Mensch. And we've been using this idea of mensch. Mensch is a full, holy, mature person, a loving person if we think about it biblically. And we want to make sure that we're accepting no substitutes in terms of the men we put in leadership over us, because if we don't have men who are loving the Lord, they will not be able to love His sheep. They will not be able to love His sheep. And so that's what we're going to be looking at this morning, is this whole idea of accepting no substitutes, because it takes a mensch to make a mensch. And so this is not a list of qualifications. I'll talk about this a little bit more. But I want you to think more broadly about this, that this is not just a list of things that somebody works at ticking off in his life, but that this is an expression of the work of the Holy Spirit in a man's heart who is serious about walking in humility with the Lord. And so Paul goes on, and so he tells Timothy, he's telling us, he says, accept no substitutes. And so there are two reasons, right? He says, accept no substitutes. And not two reasons, but there are two ways in which we do this. Appoint men who long to lead God's flock. Accept no substitutes. In other words, we must find men who long to lead God's flock. Who long to lead God's flock. And so when we get into our text here, Paul is talking about the highest level of human congregational leadership. Paul is talking about the people who are given responsibility under the Lord for the care, the teaching, the feeding, the life of the people in the community. And what's interesting is the context, in our context, just in the closing verses of chapter 2, Paul has made it clear that when it comes to this level of leadership, this elder level of leadership within the community, women are not candidates for that level. And we talked about that last week. If this is news to you, 2 weeks ago, go back and listen to my message. We unpacked the text to explain why this is the case. And so this is the context in which he's speaking. So he goes on from saying, I don't allow a woman to teach or exercise authority over man in the context of the congregational leadership. He goes on to say, but these are the kinds of men that you are to appoint in those leadership roles. And the first point that he makes comes out of verse 1. He says you are to appoint men who long to lead God's flock. Look at verse 1 with me. He says, it is a trustworthy statement. If any man aspires to the office of overseer, it is a fine work he desires to do. And so when he says it's a trustworthy statement, it means way more than just this is a good idea. No, this is like you can take this to the bank. This has God's stamp of approval on it. This is critical. This is important. You need to pay attention to this. But he says that it's a trustworthy statement if any man aspires to the office of overseer. And so he's talking about this position of overseer. And so when we talk about overseer, there are several different words. There are several different Greek words that are used in the New Covenant Scriptures to describe this level of leadership in the community, over the community. And so, oh gosh, you can't read that, can you? You can? Okay, well, it's even smaller back there. So I'm going to read it off my printout. So, the terms overseer, elder, and pastor, or shepherd, are all used in the New Testament to refer to the same office. In Titus 1, 5-9, elder and overseer are used interchangeably. In Acts 20, verse 28, Paul tells the Ephesian elders, the Greek presbyteros, Acts 20, verse 17, that the Holy Spirit has made you overseers, the Greek word episkopos, which is related to the words in our text this morning, to care for, Greek word poimino, that is, the pastor serves as a shepherd, the church of God. It goes on and says, Peter also writes, I exhort the elders, the Greek word presbytos, among you as a fellow elder, shepherd, poimino, to pastor the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight. 1 Peter 5, 1 and 2. Paul commends the role of serving the church in this way as a noble task. Overseer stresses the role of watching over the congregation. Got it? And so don't be confused when you hear about, people talking about, well, the bishop in my church, or the deacon, in some churches, the deacons are serving as elders. And, you've got Presbyterians, and they're all different forms of government, but all of those words are used not quite interchangeably, but they all overlap in reference to this role of leadership in the community. And so that's what Paul is talking about. And when he gets to verse 1 and he says, if any man aspires to the office of overseer, and he's saying this, he's saying that the one who sees the need for this, the one who sees that God has set up his community to work this way and wants it to work the way God uses it. And so he's reminding Timothy that loving leaders want to lead. And so he wants him to appoint men who want to lead, who long to lead, in that they see its importance and the need for it. They see its importance and the need for it. It isn't that they like to stick their nose in other people's business. It isn't that they are leading in another capacity outside of the believing community and think, well, I'm just going to import those same techniques and skills here and it'll work. But Paul is saying if a person aspires to the leadership role as God outlines it, for God's purposes, that is to create a loving community from the inside out, for God's glory, those are the guys you want to appoint as leaders. But then he goes on and he says, not only do you see this outward model and want to engage with it according to God's will, you want to appoint men who desire to lead because they're internally motivated and they're not under compulsion to do it. They're not under compulsion to do it. And that's what he's hinting at here. He says it is a fine, or the word there actually can be translated simply good. It is a good work he desires. And so the difference between the Greek word aspire and desire is slight. But aspire is they see the bigger picture. They see that model, and they aspire to seeing that model enacted. But this word desire is an internal desire. That they have come to a place in their lives where God has grown them, and God has seen them, seen how he has used them to encourage people, to teach the Word, to help people apply the Word effectively and practically to their lives, that they have a desire to serve. And so, hey, we're down an elder after Tim left, and so we want another elder. Who's going to do it? Well, I may be able to do the checklist, yeah, but I'm busy. Okay, well, somebody's got to do it, so I'll do it. Don't want to appoint that guy. You don't want to appoint that guy. You want to appoint a guy that God has motivated from the inside out to do it, and motivated him for the right reasons, for the good of the sheep, and for the glory of God. And you want that kind of man in there. And so that's what Paul is getting at in this first verse. He says, accept no substitutes in terms of the leaders that you're going to appoint over the believing community, but we want to appoint men who long to lead God's flock. And so when it comes to appointing leaders, we can't afford to accept substitutes. And this is a sad thing to say, that there are many, many congregations within the Messianic movement who are being led by self-appointed leaders. Men who have, and occasionally a self-appointed leader actually turns out okay because they learn to humble themselves and walk under other people's authority, etc., etc. But that's rare. That's rare. But there are many, many congregations that are being led by men who simply said, I think there needs to be a Messianic Jewish congregation here. Or I used to attend one here, and now I moved, and I miss that kind of worship, and so I'm going to lead one now. And it is devastating. It is devastating. And you have congregations that are dysfunctional. I had a letter, an email last week from a brother who was part of our community, moved away. And this is just a lesson about moving away, okay? So take this to heart. A brother who moved away got involved in a local Messianic congregation. The leader is a sweet guy. He's a tender guy. He's a gentle guy. He's not an autocrat. And he does an adequate job teaching the scriptures, and they have one other elder in the congregation. But this brother wrote me because he is totally frustrated because they have no idea what it means to exercise godly discipline in the congregation. They have no idea, not only when it comes to dealing with sin, but on a smaller level, on a more practical level of who gets to decide what ministries our congregation is going to do, and how we start new ministries, and under what circumstances new ministries get started, and who is qualified to lead a ministry. And so it's the loudest voice, it's the pushiest person who drives what the congregation is doing, ministry-wise. And this brother has enough maturity to know that this is not the way it's supposed to be. And why is that? Because they have men leading the congregation who do not have the qualifications that God says He wants those men to have. And so we see it in the Messianic communication, community. Qualified men who long to lead. Listen. It is a hard job. Being an elder of this congregation is a hard job. It is a grueling job, sometimes emotionally, the last 2 weeks or so being a great example of that. And you will spend hours talking to people. You will spend hours wrestling with people over the scriptures. You will spend hours sitting by people who are crushed and grieving and hopeless. And if you appoint a man who does not long to lead the flock of God for their good and God's glory, he will burn out. He will burn out. We all get tired. We all need to step back and take a break. That's okay. Burnout often comes when a man has stepped into a leadership role who does not have that outer aspiration and that inner desire given by God. And I could go on and talk about it, but loving leaders want to lead for the right reasons. They want to lead for the right reasons. He says it is a good thing they desire to do. It's good. It's total. It means it's God's will. It's God's plan. And so we don't want to accept any substitutes, but we want to make sure that when we appoint men into leadership roles, we appoint men who long to lead God's flock. Now, having said that, it doesn't mean you think you can do it perfectly. It doesn't mean you think you're going to do it right every time, all the time. But it is a man who understands God's order, and a man who has come to a place in his life where the people around him, as well as the Spirit of God, have affirmed the gifting and the maturity necessary to serve in that And so Paul says, accept no substitutes, appoint men who long to lead God's flock. That's verse 1. Now, every point is not going to be one verse. So the next point is the last 6 verses in our passage. So the next point is, accept no substitutes, appoint men who have learned to love God's flock. Who have learned to love God's flock. You want to appoint men who know how to love. Because guess what? If you want to make benches, it takes a bench to make a bench. And that's exactly the point that Paul makes in his list of qualifications that he gives to Timothy. He tells us loving leaders have learned how to love. Now, just so you understand that in Olive Tree's elder appointment process, we believe a biblical pattern is leaders, qualified appointed leaders, recognize and appoint qualified leaders. All right? And so we work hard, prayerfully, at trying to discern qualifications of a potential candidate. And one of the tools that we use to do this is what we call our, what do we call it? It's a character assessment. It's an elder character assessment survey. And it's a survey that is given to 3 different people to take. It's given to the elder candidate, it's given to the elder candidate's wife, and it is given to another mature believer who knows the elder candidate well. And then the questionnaire actually is all of these qualifications plus a few others from other texts in the Scripture. And so I'm going to use those descriptions as a way to quickly move through what Paul means by each of the things that he mentions. And so look with me, if you will, in verse 2. It says, in the NASB, it says an overseer. Really, technically, it's literally the overseer. Then must. The Son of Man must give his life. Okay, it's not optional. Must. He says the overseer then must be above reproach. And then he goes on and he gives this entire list of things. And so that's what we're going to look at now. We're going to look at this list with a quick definition of each of these things. And so the first one is this. A mensch is above reproach. And so what does Paul mean by that? He doesn't mean perfect. He doesn't mean you can never say he did something wrong. It doesn't mean you can say, oh, he never sins. Right? Because then what? Either we'd be waiting for Jesus to come back to be our sole leader, or we would be leaderless, and that would really be chaos. So above reproach means his reputation will not hinder his ministry. His reputation will not hinder his ministry. Meaning that the way he lives out his life, generally speaking, does not disqualify him from that position. So, if you're a shyster at work, that's not above reproach. If you are known for cheating on your taxes, you're not above reproach. It tells you something about your character. And so, above reproach, that his reputation will not hinder ministry. Husband of one wife. And this is the way we have it defined here. If married, pure in commitment to and care for his spouse. Now, we do not necessarily believe that a one-woman man, which is the literal translation of the text, means that an elder must be married. We don't think that it's necessarily improper for an elder to not be married. And why would we say that? I think of 2 people that are very familiar with the book of 1 Timothy. The guy who wrote it, the guy who sent it to him. Right? And so we know that it doesn't mean you must be married to be an elder. But then the question is raised, well, what if you're divorced? Okay? And so then you get into the question of, well, what if they were divorced before they were saved and they got remarried and And so I believe that this is really mostly about a man who is rightly married to the woman he's married to, and who is loving her appropriately and is committed to her. Because it is all about relationship. It is all about love. And it is all about how to love people. And so he's saying you must have men who know how to love their wives. That they know how to make a commitment and keep it even when it is incredibly difficult. In sickness and in health, for better or worse. And none of us knew what that meant when we said it. It can be challenging. It can be wonderful too, obviously. But it can be challenging. So that's what he means, a husband of one wife. Somebody who knows what it means to keep that marriage commitment the way God wants him to love his wife. Temperate. That means sober, balanced, a calm and clear thinker, not given to impulse or excess. And so the guy who loves the Lord, who knows the Word, who makes himself available, but when baseball or football season comes around, if you schedule something against a baseball game or against a football game, he's not going to be there. Excess. So sober or temperate rather, sober, balanced, a calm thinker. And then prudent, self-control, disciplined in mind, objective, even under pressure or stress. Some really awful things can happen in a believing community. And you need men who, under those circumstances, know how to regulate themselves, who know how to go to the Lord in prayer and cry out to Him, and then choose to believe that God is going to lead and God is going to give the answers that they don't currently have. And so that's what Paul is saying here when he says that the candidate must be prudent, self-controlled, disciplined in mind. And the last one on this slide is respectable, meaning orderly in life and work. And so when you look at his life, generally it kind of is like above reproach. His life is a fairly well-oiled machine. His cars are running relatively well based on his income and ability to keep them running. That his house is not falling down around his family. And things of that nature, that he's respectfully, he's orderly in life. He gets the sleep he needs, he gets the rest he needs, he gets the exercise he needs. It's those kinds of things. It's somebody who is mature enough to live a regulated life, a self-regulated life, or self-meaning, self-in the Lord regulated life. And then the list goes on, and he says, a man is hospitable. And this, of course, would mean welcoming believers into their home, especially those who are in need. But the idea here is that he loves and enjoys, respects, and reaches out to strangers. Meaning that when people come in who are new to the community, he's not hiding somewhere going, oh, I hate meeting new people. Now, look, that's me. It's not that I hate meeting new people. It isn't easy meeting them. And if you're new, please don't let that stop you from talking to me. I feel really terrible about that. But it's one of the growth areas where the Lord has pressed into my life. That for me to serve effectively as an elder, I need to get over that. I need to be willing to trust the Lord to help me have a decent conversation with people I don't know, and find out about them, and have a genuine interest in who they are, why they're here, why they came, how we can serve them. Things like that. So hospitable in that regard. Able to teach. Able to effectively communicate the truths of God's Word. And this is the unique qualification of an elder. Because the elders are responsible for the doctrine of the congregation and its application to the lives of the flock. And it is unique in the role of elder. We'll see it is not mentioned in reference to deacon, which is part 2 of leadership, which will be coming next week. But that an elder has to know how to teach the Word of God. Now, it does not mean, listen, it does not mean that every elder needs to be a gifted teacher, a gifted speaker. But every elder needs to know the Word and be able to interpret the Word accurately and effectively and help people apply the truths of the Word to the practical circumstances of their lives. That's what the Apostle Paul able to teach. And then he goes on and he says, not addicted to wine, or not smoking dope, as we are going to have to say in the future. You know, we didn't have to say that so much because it was illegal and it was an assumption we made. But now we're going to have to ask our candidates, well, how often do you light up? Recreationally. You know, it's different if you have a legitimate medical need and it's used medicinally. But he says, not addicted to wine. His behavior is not negatively influenced by alcohol or other harmful habits. He does not have an addictive kind of what psychologists call an addictive personality. That is, somebody who's given over to excesses that end up, instead of him controlling those things end up controlling him. And I'll tell you what, when I am at a bar mitzvah, a bat mitzvah, or at a wedding, and beer, wine, or alcohol is served, I am very mindful about my need to hold my consumption down to a bare minimum to assure that it is not ever going to cloud my faith. Right? It's part of what it means to not be addicted to wine. And then this last one on this slide, not pugnacious. Literally not a striker. That's what the word means. And that's where we get the word pugilist from. Anybody know what the word pugilist means? It's a boxer. A boxer is a pugilist. And so he's not violent or quick-tempered. He's able to control his anger. Right? Because not all anger is sinful anger. But that he is one who knows how to control anger in a way so that it is used and accomplishes the righteousness of God. He does not involve himself or use abusive speech or conduct. So it's one thing to say, well, yeah, he hits his wife. Well, okay, get out of here. But if he tells his wife she's stupid and ugly because he's frustrated with her, then you want to look at that man and say, has he really learned how to love his wife the way Christ loved the church? So it's a critical thing. Not pugnacious. Next slide. Gentle, peaceable. That means he's encouraging. He's not harsh in dealing with other people's imperfections. And you know what? We all stink. We all smell. We've all crawled out of pits. Some of us really deep, and some of us less deep. And when you are in a leadership role and you are trying to help the sheep, you have to know when a sharp, loving rebuke is the loving thing to do, and when a kind and gentle word of understanding and encouragement is needed. And that's what Paul is pointed to here. It says, not a lover of money, not pursuing dishonest gain, not motivated by financial gain. And you don't have to worry about that here in the congregation. Because with the exception of paying expenses for things like conferences and the meals that we eat when we get together to meet for convenience and things like that, our elders, with the exception of me, are not compensated. And our philosophy of compensation in the congregation when it comes to leadership is we don't pay people based on the value of what they do. We pay them in order to free them to exercise the gifts that God has given them, most of them. And so we don't want to hire somebody who is going to say, well, you know, I'm looking to get 125 grand, and if I don't get that, you know, there's no point in talking. The answer to that is you're right. There's no point in talking if you're going to come with that attitude. Or if you're going to use the finances of the congregation for your own personal benefit, especially apart from the oversight of the other elders. I know leaders of congregations who the property of their congregation is in their name personally. It is their personal property. I'm thinking, there's something wrong with this picture. But it is easy for people to be motivated by the love of money. There's nothing wrong with being wealthy. This is not to say you cannot have wealthy elders. This is, you don't want elders who are motivated and serving money instead of God. Manages his own household well. This is critical. Manages his own household well. This is one of the only ones that he makes a side comment on when he says this. He says in verse 4, one who manages or rules his own household well, keeping his children under control with all dignity. And so so it's important that he says with all dignity, because we're not talking about a guy who, his children are like, tell me. That's not what we're talking about. All dignity is a man who knows how to love his children, that is, who knows when to encourage them and who knows when to discipline them. And who isn't afraid to say, no, you can't do that, and here are the consequences if you do. A man who knows how to lead in his own home, he must know how to do that. And there's a debate in the believing community. Does that mean all of his children must know the Lord? No, I don't believe that's what it means. But I do believe that all of his children, as far as it's up to him, have been taught how to respect him as a leader in the home. And have been encouraged to trust and love the Lord based on right teaching and a loving attitude. Those are the qualifications. Because Paul says, if he can't do that in his own home, if he doesn't know how to make disciples in his own home, how is he going to make disciples in Messiah's community? How is that going to happen? The answer to that question is what? This is not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And so he says, manages his own household well. I'm going to try to speed up a little bit here. Not a new convert. He has had time to mature in his walk with and dependence on the Lord. And that's the admonition that Paul has here. He says, and not a new convert. That is, not having come to faith recently. And what's interesting is, you may be very successful. You may be a wonderful leader already. You may have many of these traits already built into your life because you were blessed to have grown up in a godly environment. But the apostle says, not a new convert, so that he will not become conceited and fall into the condemnation incurred by the devil. In other words, he's not going to buy his own press. I'm hot stuff because I'm an elder in this congregation. You need to respect me. So why not a new convert? Because if you've been walking with the Lord for any period of time, you know you're not hot stuff. And you know that apart from the Lord, you would never be qualified to lead in the congregation. And you know that apart from the Lord and dependence on Him, you cannot lead in the community. So the Apostle Paul warns us, and he says, not a new convert, because deceit will deceive him. Conceit, he said, conceit will deceive him, and he will create trouble in the community. Then he goes on, and he says, mentions, what? I just repeated that. Yeah, that's the same one. Okay, I don't know how we got that one in there twice. Forgive me. Okay, then he's got not a lover of money. Wait a minute. How did this happen? Okay, it's the same slide, just with one more at the end. A good reputation. I'm sorry. A good reputation outside. Outside. So all these other things that he just listed are all the things that we need in the community in order for this leader to love us in a way that is going to encourage us to love God and to love each other. But he says, in addition to what he needs for those inside the community, in reference to those outside, he finishes and he says he must have a good reputation with those outside, so that he will not fall into reproach and the snare of the devil to bring dishonor on the name of the Lord. So he's well respected by the people in his business, by the people in his neighborhood, things of that nature. This is a high standard. It's an incredibly high standard. And it's not a checklist of things that you tick off. These are organic things. These are inside-out growth issues. These are the fruit of a life given over to the love of God through the study of His Word and submission to His Holy Spirit. These are the kinds of men we need to beg God to give us. And these are the kinds of men, I believe, each man of this congregation should aspire to be. If you want to know where God is leading you, what the end game might begin to look like, that's what this list is. It's a challenge to all of us as men. And I would also say that there's a sense in which we can apply this equally to women, because what one of these things, with the exception of teach and exercise authority over men, would you say, that doesn't apply to me? It applies to all of us, but especially to leaders. Accept no substitutes. Appoint men who have learned to love God and His flock. This is a spiritual work. Only those who know Messiah and are being transformed by Him can do it in a way that's going to produce the fruit God desires. So, do you want to be a mensch? You want to be a mensch, a messianic mensch, a Messiah-like mensch? It starts with knowing the Messiah. It starts with recognizing that He is the exemplar of love. That He is the model to which we should all aspire. That He has demonstrated for us what it means to care for people in the most intimate, personal, sacrificial way possible. So it starts with recognizing His love for you. It starts with recognizing His death, paying for your sin. And the transformation into a mensch begins simply by faith, by putting your trust in what the Messiah has done for you, for the forgiveness of your sin, for your cleansing in the sight of God, to be clothed in His righteousness, to receive the gift and the empowerment of His Spirit, who indwells us to change us from the inside out. So I would encourage you, if you have not yet met the mensch, capital M, Messiah, let today be the day you put your faith in Him. For the rest of us who know Him already, may we be stirred in our hearts to prayerfully seek from the Lord the kind of man who will lead and rule out of love in this community. Love for God, love for sheep, that His name might be exalted, that the good news might go out with power, illustrated in transformed lives. Amen. Let's pray. Father, we thank You so much for Your word, and we thank You for this amazing admonition by the Apostle Paul. We thank You, Lord, that You are challenging us this morning to not accept substitutes, to not take shortcuts, but to pray and work and grow and appoint men who will lead according to Your will and for Your glory and for the good of Your flock. Lord, this would be impossible apart from You, but we thank You that this is the very thing that You are doing. We thank You for the transforming power of the gospel. I pray, Father, that today those who don't know You would turn to You in faith and begin to find You faithful beyond their wildest imagination. Lord, I pray for all of us, each of us, especially the men in this congregation, that we would long to lead the way You call us to lead, that the Olive Tree congregation might grow and continue to be a place of love and effective service. We thank You, Lord, that this is Your will, so we thank You. We can ask it confidently in Yeshua's name.